So just to get started, I suppose this is webinar number 3, which is very exciting. We had a great session last week with Adrienne, which I think I found incredibly inspiring. And all of the pieces between myself and Adrienne kind of slot together. So this week really will be focusing on the creative process. And there's a lot of different kinds of creative processes. They have they all share some commonalities. So I'll be focusing particularly on one called the Stanford design process, the design thinking process. But before we jump into that, I just want to do a little recap just in relation to, actually, the very first thing I want to do is my favorite little guy, the little bee. So I just want everyone to take a moment, and we'll just pause for maybe 60 seconds or so, and I want you to think of a moment when something you spent a long time working on was completed. So I want you to kind of focus on that feeling of the satisfaction, the moment when something it could have been a college project, it could have been a personal project, it could have been building something, it could have been anything. But just take a moment to sit with that thought about how it felt when something became a reality, when something was completed. So we'll just take 60 seconds, we'll just kind of sit, nice deep breaths, and just think about that moment. Great. So once again, it's always good to take that moment of to know kind of where you were at when you were working on something. There's a few more people joining us. So I'm just going to get anybody who's joining just to mute your mic as you come in, if that's okay. Just because otherwise we might get a little bit of interference. Yeah. Perfect. Great, thank you. So for me, I'm not going to go around and ask you to tell me about your moments. I think they're quite personal. So, but one I always think about is I work on a lot of web design, web development projects, and there's nothing like hitting that button and getting something out there and for it to be out in the world. Because you'll spend a lot of time testing and checking and going back and revising, and it's always a longer process than you think it's going to be. So I always find that really satisfying when that happens. But just before we go into the creative process session, I just want to take a little step back just to chat a little bit about the digital showcase that we'll be working towards. So basically, I'm not going to go into full details. We kind of covered it in depth on webinar 1, which is on the link, on the site link at the bottom of the page. If you want to watch back over that, it kind of gives more details on what the digital showcase is. So similar to the showcase that Lots of Different Talent in Autumn, it's all about your work and basically taking an opportunity to showcase your talent, and that's what we want to do. We want to take some examples of your talent and showcase them through a mini, like a kind of a page on the site that would feature your work. That can be new. It's fantastic if you're working on a new idea, but I know that's not really possible for everybody at the moment. So it could be something existing. It could be something from a college project that you're currently working on or that you've recently completed. I'd ask that it be different if you were part of the autumn showcase, that it's something maybe new or something progressed from then. We'll be looking at kind of doing this digital showcase in the second week of May, was what we were saying originally. Time flies. But do feedback. What I want to hear is like basically this is all about kind of, I want to give you guys the best opportunity to, if you're working on something and you actually think, gosh, we've got a lot of we might have exams on or we have assignments due in college and this time frame isn't working, really want to give you the chance to engage. So let the team know if the timeline is problematic for you for any reason. So, I mean, we can look at options around maybe doing a set of releasing a set of projects first and then doing a second phase maybe a little bit later. The digital showcase will kind of live online, so it's not time bound in that way. And we're here obviously to support you on this journey. And I think an important thing is As with any process, so this currently is a creative process that we're going through collectively to work towards something like this digital showcase. It's all about pivoting. So basically, I'm going to talk about pivoting in a moment. So basically, if the time frame isn't working for you, feedback. We'll look at it. We want to set kind of some timelines and kind of check-in points and deadlines, but we want to make sure those are realistic for yourselves. So in relation to what the piece you might be showcasing, that's kind of that new or existing work, and then every piece will have, each one of you will have your own page to show that, as well as what we worked on before, to kind of give yourself a title: storyteller, entrepreneur, photographer, whatever words you associate or want to associate with yourselves, to talk about your passion, to give a description of the project, and to look towards your future. And once again, this digital showcase will be going out to people in the not so different network, so some of the organizations, the corporate organizations, the employer organizations that we work with, to once again showcase the brilliant talent you have on offer. So really, I want to talk to you about from idea to reality, and it's something that I know has come up, and different people have different ways of kind of, as in coming up with an idea is one thing, and we're actually going to touch on that because oftentimes we think about kind of just the step from, okay, I've got an idea and how do I get to reality, but there's a few layers behind an idea itself. Sometimes we come up with something and we kind of need to think about kind of where is that idea coming from and how do we refine an idea, and then how do we move it forward. So that'll be the focus of this, and I'm going to show you a few different models. Everyone has their own. Everyone has their own approach. There's people like, there's authors like Marion Keyes, who, in her thing is she says, I get up, I think Maeve Binchy was similar, and she said, I get up every morning, I sit down on my computer, I write for 4 hours, no matter what. That's her saying. But then there was other kind of, as in, authors and kind of people who said, look, as in, I need to wait for the moment for it to come to me, and I kind of spend a lot of time thinking and sort of going out for walks and finding ways to tap into my creativity that way. So everyone is unique in terms of how they approach their creative process. But I'm just going to bring you through some design thinking concepts and methodologies that might be useful in terms of harvesting it, and I can then show you some of the alternatives that exist out there. So I'm just going to start off with a couple of points just in relation to, once again, my own experience. I, as many of you know, kind of work specifically with organizations who have a social purpose, which has been a fantastic part of my life. And at one point I was given the opportunity to study social enterprise, which DCU, as it happened. And I went into it kind of thinking that I knew everything about kind of like creativity and creative processes. I was kind of like, and they'd brought me in as, as I was one of the storyteller amongst other people who were kind of more business minded. What I realized when we went through that course around looking at these design processes is I realized that I first of all, didn't know as much as I thought I did in terms of how one comes up with ideas. And it gave me a framework and a structure. So a big thing around it was kind of getting unstuck. So creative processes are really useful for kind of getting unstuck, as I call it, because we can get anyone who's coming up with something, you can have that moment where you're going, gosh, I'm just kind of in this and I don't know how to move forward. So having a structure, and having, I suppose, what we call a framework, is really useful for getting unstuck, I find. The other thing I sort of learned there was that ideas always serve a purpose. So even if it's a painting, as a painting is the realization of an idea that you have in your head, but we wanted to do something, we wanted to move someone, we wanted to relate a message, we wanted to achieve something. So it tends never to be kind of just, you're not putting paint on a canvas just for the sake of putting paint on a canvas. You're putting paint on a canvas to relate something that's in your head, and for that to be seen, and for that to move people. The other thing is around the creation, almost, and I qualify almost because it's never an absolute, never happens in a vacuum. So we're kind of always interacting with others. I always think of, and a lot of people think that, for instance, authors are very kind of isolated and they kind of just work in their own world and don't, they just kind of write a book and then it gets published and that they did all the work. Occasionally, very occasionally, that's true, but almost all creative processes involve other people. So an author will have an editor, A director will have a cinematographer. A business entrepreneur will have a chief operating officer. There's always people and kind of things people that we kind of interact with and connect with, and also again the audiences that we're reaching are people that we also connect with. So we're always kind of responding to other people with our ideas. And this is the third point I wanted to raise there about my own experience with it, was that pivoting and being open to the change it's critical. It's one of those things that it's hard sometimes because we have kind of our idea set and we kind of go think this is wonderful, and then we discover, okay, it's a good idea, but it's missing something, and somebody else will kind of, you'll take it to somebody and you'll talk to somebody about it, and they'll say, oh, have you thought about this? So being flexible and pivoting is a big word in kind of the startup scene and in your Googles, your Airbnbs, your various things. When the context changes in particular, you might pivot, you might just kind of alter the idea, or when your process of discovery gives you a new realization, you might pivot and you might change things. So that's really important, to be open to that. The being open to change. I love this little sketch. I have this fondness for sometimes when when giving in-person sessions, people have a tendency to draw sketches of me. I think it's because of the beard. This is one I did with a youth group out in Dún Laoghaire, and there was a young man who was part of this kind of focus group, and he was doodling away, and I was wondering, what are you working on? He was just doing the sketch of me, and I was kind of going, I thought that he wasn't focused on the session itself, and what it turned out was that he was kind of a little bit in his own head and kind of thinking about, I'd be kind of been presenting them with a lot of ideas, this youth group, around how we could work on better mental health for young people in that area. I had to be very open because once I got him talking, the young man who did the sketch, he started to tell me about his own experience. I had all these presumptions, that some of which were right, some of which were wrong. But in talking to him and in listening to him, I realised that there was a greater depth to the experience of, in that instance, mental health. And so his engagement gave me all this new information. So we radically changed the project we were working on. We kind of almost flipped it on its head. It was meant to be kind of, mental health services talking to young people, and it became more about young people talking to mental health services. So that was really illuminating. But if I'd been stuck on my way I thought something should work, I wouldn't have been able to achieve the outcomes. And now it's really working. Making mistakes is critical. Going into a creative process, you're always going to come along road bumps, and you're going to do something, and you're going to be like, oh, no, that wasn't what I intended. That is absolutely fine. If we're not willing to make mistakes, and we're not willing to make risks, if we're not willing to get negative feedback, if we're not willing to get critical feedback, anything like that, it means that we'll often find ourselves stuck as well. And a critical thing in that is that you and your idea are separate. You have your idea, you formed your idea, but basically feedback you might be receiving in relation to your idea is not feedback on you. So basically, sometimes, particularly I find with entrepreneurs, with business people, they are one with their idea. They kind of think any change to that idea is almost like having kind of like as a change themselves. But it's important that we realize that separation. When somebody is giving us constructive feedback on our idea, they're not telling us that our idea is bad, that we're bad. They might just say, we don't like this part of your idea. We're not saying that we don't like you. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Similarly, that like if you have a great idea, as in you need to let that grow separate from yourself. And I'm going to come back to that principle about kind of keeping, to not be too precious about your idea, to allow it to grow outside of yourself. So I love this drawing around developing a creative process. So this is often how it feels. So there's a start point when you're kicking off, and there's an end point. It is not a straight line, and sometimes can feel like squiggles. It can feel like you're going back around. It can feel like you're going up and down. It can feel like you've half reversed on the creative process. That could be, as in when you're kind of tearing something up that you didn't like, or making a big leap forward. The creative process isn't linear. That's important to point that out. There is never a case that I've seen it go kind of exactly as we've planned. But what I'd like to see happening is moving from this kind of squiggle pattern towards something more like this. This sort of drawing where it's like just little squiggles going back or little loops kind of going back. That would be an ideal creative process. It's usually still a little bit more disorganized than that, but what we're trying to do is straighten out the line of our creative thinking so that we kind of have steps and touch points so we know what direction we're going in with our kind of planning our idea. So what we're going to jump into is the Stanford design thinking model. So Stanford's very famous for what's called the D School, which is the design school. It was founded by a gentleman called David Kelly in 2003, but it was based on a lot of kind of ideas and research that preceded that. They've got some great materials, links to which, because I'm going to give kind of an overview of this way of approaching things. But there's some, all of their stuff they create is open source, which is amazing, which means that I can draw on it, you can draw on it yourselves. And then there's a little kind of booklet around the design thinking process. You'll see in this, and I'm kind of trying to break it down a small bit, and if you read any of their materials, design thinking is kind of, was originally very much oriented around kind of solving business problems. So somebody would kind of be trying to kind of refine a product even. It could be anything from a car to a website to things that usually often functioned in that sort of business world. The design thinking ideas have become much broader than that. So now there's kind of applications of design thinking into storytelling, which I'll show towards the end. There's design thinking in art, in education, in creativity. It's all really about kind of coming up with kind of how do we solve a problem. Design at its heart is about solving problems. Creativity at its heart is about addressing something, and we do that in various means and methods. So you'll see there that there's kind of 5 steps they break it down to. There's a little more detail. I'll show you a more detailed version, but basically empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. I'm going to break down what those words mean because on that broad overview, it can be quite confusing. So I'm just going to take each of those and explore them a little bit with you. So empathize. What empathize really is research. So there's a couple of steps in that. So you might be coming up with an idea, or you might be kind of have a challenge. You might be oftentimes, and you might encounter this in college, they'll kind of give you a brief, or you'll kind of go, I want to address a social issue, a business issue, whatever it is. I want to come up with a story that kind of helps people understand neurodiversity better, or something like that. You have something that you've kind of been put to. So the first step to this empathize or research phase is basically take the time to view and understand your subject. So I'm going to give you a real world example of where I didn't do this in a minute. But basically taking that time to step back, oftentimes we don't give ourselves enough time at the beginning of a creative process to sit down, read some books, look up some websites, talk to people that are kind of, would be the audience for something, kind of go, how do they feel about something? How do they think, and what are their reactions? Read materials that have been done by other people, and ask questions of experts in the field. Take the time to sort of develop an understanding of your subject matter. Immerse yourself. Try and sit yourself in the mindset of the audience you want to reach, or of the problem you're trying to address. I'll give you 2 examples of kind of where I did this. I'm not going to say wrong, because it was a useful mistake, and where I did this well. So when I was 14, I wrote a novel, which was very aspirational at the time, and I was one of those kids who thought he could write a novel at 14. I didn't well say it wasn't too bad. But the thing is, I wrote a novel about set in Brooklyn, and it was all about vampires, and it would have done very well in recent years with the uptick in kind of the interest in that sort of supernatural side of things. But at the time, I had absolutely no understanding about this New York, the city I was basing something in, and I didn't really understand characterization, and I didn't really understand human relationships. And it was really a lot about, I was trying to write something about human relationships that I didn't understand. So I remember kind of sending it off for some feedback, and one of the things the publisher actually kindly engaged with and gave me a letter back to say, you have very clearly never been to New York City. And I thought, at the time, I was like, oh, why would I need to know that? And looking back now, I think, anytime we're creating, we need to, like, if we're writing a story about something, we need to figure out a way or developing our own understanding about subject matter. We can draw a lot on our life experiences. Like, a lot of times you'll see ideas are kind of drawn from our own personal experiences. So oftentimes some of the great social entrepreneurs are people who have had experience, say, of poor mental health, and then they create, maybe a mental health platform. So they have an intrinsic deep understanding, and they've done their research, and they've spent time empathizing with other people about kind of how they want to push the issue forward. An example in terms of where I would have done this well is more recent work. So basically, anytime I'm approaching, I do a lot of documentary filmmaking, and when I was going out, and I'm going to come back to the story at the very end as well. I was going out to a country called Sierra Leone to make a short film about how they dealt with various crises over there, particularly Ebola. So what I did is I spent a good bit of time before I left to understand the history of Sierra Leone. I talked to people who had been there, and I developed this depth of understanding to know what the experience was like there. So basically, when I started to go out and move towards kind of creating something, I was informed, I was asking the right questions, I was kind of delving deeper so that I had that critical baseline research and empathy formed for the subject that I was engaging with. Is define. So this is all about setting up a point of view. So you've done your research and you've kind of talked to people and you've kind of explored some of the greater understanding around who you're designing for and what you're creating for. So you have your context. So then, based on this understanding, you have to come up with an actionable problem statement. So your point of view. So more than simply sort of saying what the problem is that you're addressing, what the kind of the challenge is, what the brief is. Your point of view is your unique vision that is framed by understanding. So kind of your take on something. So once again, I just want to draw on that sort of the piece that I was doing in documentary filmmaking in terms of Sierra Leone. So we go over, and when we're doing a documentary, we try to stay open to things. So then we'd kind of do that collection, we were talking to people, and so I started to realise that my insight into what had happened there was that not only, for instance, were they affected by some of the crises, some of the health crises that the country had taken, but I realised that my kind of point of view was that there was a deeper challenge around the way people were affected by trauma and mental health in that situation. So I started to form kind of my point of view was to explore in my creative work that I was doing, that I would explore kind of the deeper level issues. So my point of view was that, health issues don't just affect us physically, they can affect our emotional and mental well-being. So that kind of formed the basis for how I would move forward and how I would start to develop and kind of test ideas. Similarly, the point of view you might see, I talked a little bit about the organization Food Cloud, who works on eliminating food waste and alleviating food poverty. So their kind of point of view in the work that they do would be that basically, as in there is too much food going into waste food going into landfills, while there are so many people going hungry. So therefore, technology offers a solution to be able to match those two different problems. That there's basically a unique standpoint that they had, an insight that they developed based on their kind of research to say that, okay, we can use these two issue areas to kind of alleviate each other. You'll see it, this point of view is different from every business. You'll often see it in kind of a vision or a mission statement that they'll come up with. So basically, how they see their issue in the context of what they can do. Because obviously, if you're a creative, if you're a writer, your point of view is kind of the lens through which, your unique lens in which you will address kind of the subject matter. I'm going to just jump straight from point of view into the next slide, and then I'll take questions on it. Because this is the ideate phase. So this is kind of the coming up with ideas, brainstorming. So what we say here is like ideation and coming up with ideas is a process of going wide. Concept outcomes. So it's what they call in the design school flaring instead of focus. So basically, you're not kind of narrowing in yet. You're kind of coming up with lots of different takes you could go on. So basically, for instance, if you were writing a novel, you can kind of go, oh, okay, we could do a huge open world kind of fantasy scenario, which has a huge range of characters, and we can kind of explore the issues within their society in this broad way. Or maybe I'm going to focus in on a single character and explore everything through their lens, and maybe we'll use kind of aspects of their identity. Maybe we want to explore through a female character's experience of kind of the Middle Ages and kind of the challenges there, or maybe we want to take a character from another country and kind of have them explore the world through that. So you're kind of coming up with and so kind of maybe the territory you want to kind of go with, but you've got lots of different means and methods. So just you put them all down, you kind of come up with solutions, paths, directions, options for kind of the way you'll create. And oftentimes if somebody's addressing a social issue, they might kind of say, we could create an app to address this. We could kind of do it in this manner or this method, or maybe we'd do an awareness campaign. So you have lots of different options in which you can kind of address your point of view, and it's good to be bold and free in this moment, and then kind of channeling down and refining in the next stage. The next phase is around prototyping. So once again, you kind of might take some of those ideas, and now it's time, and this can often be the most challenging thing. It says here, basically what they say is a prototype is anything that can take a physical form. Once again, it can be that wall of post-its that you can put down, sketches on Notepad. It can be a stream of consciousness Word document, or it can be literally something you actually create. It can be kind of different drawings, storyboards, anything like that. The thing with prototyping is that it's a direction, a plan, and a version. As in, and I say you can kind of, what I'd often do is kind of take, once again, I'll just use an example of, say, a website project. We'd have lots of ideas, and then I like 3. So I take 3 and we kind of develop them out. So each would look a bit different, but there's something that basically, the prototyping is something that people can respond to. And there's an important relationship between the prototyping and the next stage, because I want to talk about these two together, that basically these are kind of circular. So basically the next stage is test. So prototype and test kind of go in this sort of pattern. So you prototype, you test your idea with people, you go back, you refine the prototype, the version, you go back to people, and then you kind of, it's quite circular, and you'll see that on my latter slides. But whatever the prototype is, and it's kind of just, once again, it's kind of it's a rough version. It's options, because similarly, like sometimes clients might ask me for 10 versions of a website because they want to choose, and I kind of go, look, we've kind of gone through that sort of brainstorming phase, but I've selected kind of a couple to refine and turn. So I kind of usually like in the prototyping to kind of have a couple of versions, because you don't want to be, this part is not as wide as the brainstorming phase. You've kind of selected a few to refine, and these are ones that you kind of can present to people. So it's in that testing, so that conversation and feedback. This is where, this is what I often like, the critical piece. So creative works are designed to move something or someone in some way. You set out a purpose for your work, now it's time to bring it to that audience. So you take those, whether it's the design mock-ups, or whether it's the, for a novel, it might be kind of the broad story arc that you kind of written down a few different versions. Whether if it's the app, it might be kind of just as in a quick version that isn't it it's not going to be working fully, but it's enough to kind of get people to say what they think of it. And critically here, and sometimes people kind of go a little bit too broad, like testing, particularly initially, you kind of engage with people who understand what you're trying to do. They understand a vision, and you ask them questions on how what you're creating realizes that vision. So if you show something to somebody, some people are very, very opinionated and they'll have an opinion on anything, and some people are very reluctant to give opinions. I find Irish people oftentimes we have a reluctancy to kind of say anything bad. So we're not great, I find, at giving feedback. Other cultures tend to be a little bit better at it. But so that's why it's important when you're testing that you have questions. So basically, kind of, I'd often say, when we're doing a campaign video for a particular social cause, I kind of take it as somebody who, once again, might not be entirely divorced from it. They might have a kind of a sense of what the issue is about. They might kind of understand who I am, what I'm trying to do, and I'll ask them some initial questions and kind of go, does this give you a better understanding of this issue area? Does it make you connect to it emotionally, or does it make you laugh? Does it make you cry? What were the things you were trying to have it do? And then you ask people those questions about your prototype, your version. Then you can loop back into prototype, refine it, do another version, and then maybe when you go to test again, you might go to somebody who understands it less, who kind of has less of a connection to you, to the issue, and then you engage in the process of feedback. And businesses kind of actually spend a lot of time jumping back and forth between prototype and test. And oftentimes, and you look at things like maybe Google or what's a good example? A lot of the digital technologies, a lot of the apps and that sort of thing, they never finished prototyping and testing. They're always kind of going back and doing revisions and versions. Sometimes that can be solving technical issues that come up in the testing phase. But we've gotten to the point in recent times that it tends to be a more continuous process. And I'm just realizing that I'm going slightly over on time, so I'm going to try and speed up. This is kind of when they lay it out fully, they always show these circles repeating back inside themselves. You got that inspiration, that first phase, you got that ideation, your ideation, prototype, and testing phase, and then implementation is when you're actually creating. You've done all the things, you're on the right path, and then you kind of go down and you knuckle down and you do the hard work and you make the thing. But it's in that kind of those earlier exploration phases that puts you on the right track, and you've tested. That this is a good idea, that it works in terms of addressing it, and then in that last phase around kind of, once you're out of the design thinking process, you're then into kind of, you're writing the chapters, you're recording the material, you're doing the edits, you're building out the app, you're doing all those sorts of things, you're making the business, you're hiring the staff, you're doing all these sorts of things. So in that implementation phase that leads out from the ideation and prototype and testing, that's when we start to see real things that you can kind of just knuckle down and make. Okay, I'm just going to show you the different versions based on this design thinking process that we've seen. So this is an example of it in kind of the storytelling context. So here they put things a little bit differently, like in kind of when you come up with a rough idea, write a proposal is what they suggest. And that's kind of that's reordering things a small bit, but basically then they still say you research, you explore, you learn, you write a script, you do a storyboard plan, you get to create images, you test it, you put it all together, you share, you feedback and reflect, and that's a continuous process. So basically, a lot of the same elements, but they might restructure it slightly differently there. Similarly, this is another variation of it, which is the universal creative process, what they say, which is basically, once again, I quite like this one because it's a little bit I think easier to access, but it is based on the Stanford Design School principles. So basically, at the start, you identify that goal, wish, opportunity. Then 2 is your research phase, where you gather input and insight. 3 is that point of view, clarifying the challenges, generating ideas. My screen is actually blocking 5, and I can't actually read it, so I'm just going to double check it on my other screen. Yes, the prototype and strengthening. then you plan for action and you implement and evaluate. So once again, this is also showing that it's quite circular, that it's kind of coming back and feeding back on itself. There's two last ones that I want to show you, which is just a little bit more around the feeling side of the creative process. So we often start off with, this is awesome, I'm working on something great. And then you realize the challenges, and this is tricky. And then you can go, oh, this is shit. And then you start to maybe kind of reflect that challenge into yourself, which is something that I think we need to overcome. So oftentimes at that midpoint of creative process, you kind of go, well, am I shit? Am I not able to do this? Am I kind of challenged in this way? I talked about it earlier. It is really important to separate yourself from your idea and creative process, because no, you're not shit and the idea isn't shit. Because basically, once you work through the challenges, you kind of move back into that hopeful phase of this might be okay. You know, so this is something that I think I'm connected back to the original idea I had, and I want to move it forward. And then you kind of come on to the this is awesome, like again. So it's that circularity, it's that challenge, but it's the having the process guides us through, so we know some of the phases, and so we know as well that we can kind of always test and repeat back. The other one I like is just very reflective of what often happens, which is more of a timeline. Work begins, and then you're stuck in kind of a lot of the process of it, and then you're coming up to a deadline and you panic, and it's all the work while crying deadline. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us have been there for college works, but I just think it's a really funny variation on how, because we can have all the processes and we can have all the methodologies and steps that we want, but in reality, oftentimes, you know, things don't work as well as that, but we use these creative processes, these frameworks to guide us, and they give us structure. But the real world is that, you know, some things can be a lot more chaotic, and particularly when you're doing something creative, it doesn't often go as you expect it will. This is one last one I just want to show you, which is I really like this variation. Once again, it's still based on that Stanford D, but it's the 5 stages of creative process, which is that preparation phase, that incubation phase. And what I really like about this one is it talks about the illumination. So basically, illumination is that moment where it's that kind of eureka moment. Okay, I really like this. I think I've come across a solution. I've talked to people. I've experimented. I've gotten insight back, and then okay, I have something. I have some idea that I'm passionate about, that people are responding positively to, that I've got a bit of a structure around. So then you kind of value it, kind of go, okay, what am I learning? What am I going to do? And then your implementation phase is the work. A lot of people kind of spend all the time kind of on trying to do the work without kind of having done the other stages beforehand. So in order to kind of get into the hard slog of making something, it's really good to have spent that time thinking, planning, testing, talking, ideating, all those sort of words. And then you get into a lot of the time is spent on that last implementation phase as well. But to do the work, you need to have done the thinking, is I suppose the big takeaway I want to give. I just want to come back to one final kind of sentiment, which is basically that piece around. This is a photo from that trip I took in Sierra Leone. This is a beautiful woman called Emma. It was she was a subject in the documentary. She was also just a beautiful soul, and I always think about kind of getting to that moment where I was able to sit down and have a conversation with her. It was the thing that starts with come up with a plan. We just kind of know what we did. What we were going to do. We had to develop that research base, that sort of evidence, that point of view that, okay, we were going over there to try and achieve this. In the moving forward, I had to trust myself that to some extent the ideas we come up with, that we were testing, that we were, you know, in doing this creative work would work. But I shared and listened, so I got as much insight and perspective on the approach we were taking as possible. And then we were landed in Sierra Leone in the heat, in trying to carry around equipment and gear and get between places. The roads were terrible, but there I was, talking to people, meeting people in an informed way, in a creative way, and I got to hear her story, and I got to create a work that related her story to specific audiences. And because if I hadn't done that planning, that trusting, that sharing and listening before that, I wouldn't have gotten the responses out of her, I wouldn't have been able to ask her the right questions. So by going through that creative process myself, I was able to do the job I was meant to do for her. And what came back, and it was kind of a piece that was specifically for Irish Aid, and we were able to see that it got them more funding, it got them more opportunity, and that really meant the world. So having the purpose and being able to realize that purpose, and it kind of goes back to the thing I asked you at the very beginning, kind of around taking a moment to think of a time when something was complete. Ideas will reach completion and they will reach the stage that they do their job, but we need to spend that bit of time in terms of planning them, evaluating them, looking at them, getting frustrated with them, testing them, talking to people, hearing critical feedback, hearing positive feedback, hearing constructive feedback is the important part to get us along that journey. And then you'll get some great results. In 2 weeks' time, I'll be doing another session around showcasing and actually and how we sort of, I suppose, take ideas and then sort of disseminate them is what I call. It's the nonsense word, but basically just kind of bring them to an audience, bring them to form how we might look at our works, no matter what they are, whether they're business ideas, whether they're apps, whether they're books, whether they're design works, and basically showcasing, and it'll obviously tie in to the digital showcase we're doing, but basically a lot of time people create, but they don't have a plan for how they then take their creation to people and how they kind of grow how they connect that wonderful creative work to the people who really would be enriched or changed or somehow affected by. So we'll really kind of, in showcasing, which is my final session in 2 weeks' time, we'll really explore that. And in the meantime, you'll have another wonderful session with Adrienne next week. Adrienne, do you want to say anything about this? I think you're still there, are you? Oh.
I'm still here. I just can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Okay, I couldn't remember how to unmute my microphone. Yeah, I'm looking forward to next week. Sam, that was really great. Really enjoyed that. Um, Looking at myself in terms of the creative process, it makes sense where I am at the moment, where I won't. I'm in that big piece of it in the middle that starts with F. Uh, so thanks for that. Looking forward to next week. Next week we're going to look at goal setting and focus, how to stay focused on our goals too. So it'll be building on what we've done today. And I look forward to seeing those of you who can come along next week. Thanks, Sam.
Super. All right, thanks so much. And basically, looking forward to next week. I'll be on the call again. I think myself and Adrienne sessions have been fitting in great with each other, and it's just a pleasure to working with Adrienne. And I think once again we're looking towards kind of how we can support yourselves to explore kind of your processes, your creativity, your talent, your ability, no matter what. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is, creativity is everything. It's broad. It goes across a lot of different subjects and fields. We're all creative. We all have that sort of talent. So using some of these processes just kind of enriches your ability to use that talent and to give you some structures around it. So I've run over time, so I'm just going to say thank you. I was trying to keep more on track than I did, but just want to appreciate everybody showing up again. And if there's any questions in relation to the digital showcase, or if there's any concerns, particularly as I was saying at the beginning of the session, around timelines, or if it's conflicting with kind of assignments you might have due or various other considerations, just do feedback to the team. We can pivot as well. We're like, this entire thing is a creative process, so we can pivot and change. Want to make sure that we have some good timelines set out, but feedback to the team, to Shan, Kerry, Tony, Adele, around kind of any concerns you have around just preparing for the digital showcase if you're taking part. So thanks so much, gang.